Hi everybody, I'm Greg Fishel. Welcome to bonus weather video number 1 for this week, and we are going to be talking about some of the key ingredients for severe weather. One is wind shear and one is instability. We're going to start off with wind shear and use a tool called a hodograph to help us assess what the potential is for tornadoes in a given environment. And I'm going to go back to the case of April 16th of 2011, which was a Saturday. And if you lived in this area back then, you remember that day that there was a significant amount of damage from several tornadoes that occurred over central North Carolina that afternoon. So let's dig into this here. So a hodograph is basically a polar plot, if you will. And so the middle is the origin, okay? And then each one of those circles represents a different wind speed. So the first one is 10 knots, 20 knots, 30 knots, 40 knots, and so forth. And so for all of the different levels of the atmosphere, you plot the wind direction from the middle up to whatever the speed is. So like for instance, on the lowest level, the wind was probably about 170 degrees at about a little over 20 knots, okay? And that is that point. Let me point this out here for you. Right in here, okay? And then by the time you get up here, the wind was about 184 degrees at 60 knots, okay? So a tremendous increase in the speed and also a clockwise turn in direction from this 170 wind here to a 184 wind here. Pardon for those lines not being perfectly straight. So that's basically how you plot the points. And then you connect all of those points, and that is your hodograph plot. And I labeled the point up there, the first one over 60 knots, at about 1 kilometer, okay? And then you'll notice that after that, the speed is fairly constant. It doesn't increase nearly as rapidly with height after you get past 1 kilometer. So here is our hodograph plot from 0 to 1 and then slightly above that. So you just connect the dots. Okay, so how does all of this look from the storm's perspective? Well, there was a gentleman about 25 years ago now that wrote a paper. His last name was Bunker, and his technique is widely used in our profession in terms of estimating the storm motion. Now, you can have a storm that splits with one moving left and one moving right, and he has a technique for assessing what the storm motion would be for both of those. Or you can have a dominant right-moving supercell, and his technique also accounts for that. So since we know this was a big event that day, we're going to use the right-moving supercell motion, which, using his formula, was 225 degrees at 49 knots. So this storm was moving along at a very, very good clip, or all of them that day. Then you find the storm relative wind by drawing an arrow from the end of the storm motion vector to any point on the hodograph. So I drew a line from the end of the storm motion vector to the surface wind, and also one to the wind at 1 kilometer. So from the storm's perspective, at the surface, the wind was actually coming in from the east-northeast, and at 1 kilometer was coming in from the southeast, okay? So this tells you what the storm was seeing, you know, without any relevance to the overall motion of the storm. This is the environment the storm is experiencing. Now, this is as complicated as it's going to get, so just bear with me here. Vorticity vectors, remember vorticity is the amount of spin in the atmosphere, are always perpendicular to the shear vectors and point to the left, okay? So let's take this first level down here, between the first two dots. This is a shear vector right in here, okay? And the vorticity is going to be perpendicular to that and to the left. And so that's why this arrow goes out like that. Up here, the shear vector is oriented like this, and so the vorticity vector is going to be perpendicular to that, going out in this direction, okay? Now, if the vorticity vectors are parallel or nearly parallel, to the storm relative wind vectors, then that is called streamwise vorticity, and that is very favorable for the development of tornadoes. So you can see that this storm relative wind here, that vector, is very close to being parallel to this one. And this vorticity vector isn't quite parallel, but it's pretty darn close. It's certainly not perpendicular to this one, okay? So a lot of streamwise vorticity with that hodograph, which was very favorable for tornadoes. If those vorticity vectors would have been perpendicular to the storm relative wind vectors, that's called crosswise vorticity, and that is not nearly as favorable for tornadoes to develop. So there's a lot of things you can do with this hodograph in terms of assessing the environment, not only the overall environment, but how the storm sees the environment, and then how much potential there is for tornado development based on whether or not you have streamwise vorticity or crosswise vorticity. All right, that's as complicated as I'm going to get on that. I hope you found that interesting. And that is bonus weather video number 1 for this week. Number 2, we're going to be talking about the other component to severe weather, and that is instability. And we use something called CAPE, which is an acronym for convective available potential energy, to assess that potential. That will be the topic of the next bonus weather video, which will be coming out on Wednesday, later today. All right, that's it for now, folks. You all have a great, well, you're probably not up right now, but when you see this, hope you have a great Wednesday, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.